Ready. Oh, okay.
Hello. Good
We're live. Hi,
evening.
guys. Good evening. Good morning from my end. Yeah. Good morning from the Philippines.
From Pennsylvania. This is Alyssa Henkin and Gail is. So we're going to start by reading the question, and then we'll kind of give our 2 cents, and we'll just kind of keep the questions answers coming. So the first question is:
All right.
travel necessary if you're planning to publish from outside? Gail, do you want to take the lead on this one?
All right. Well, not necessarily. Although when I got signed with Alyssa, I was living in the I'm actually still living in the Philippines, and I did travel once. I was in NCTE and I met Alyssa actually in there for the first time ever, and actually like for 2 years
So
I
awesome,
think Alyssa is
Baltimore.
yeah, we saw each other in Baltimore
Yes,
for the first time since what, like 2017? Is that how long we've been
yes, we started
together?
working together. It was actually Valentine's Day. Well, I think one of the best things
Yeah.
about kind of an international situation, the sheer globalness of it. Like when I first
Yeah.
was lucky enough to sign Gail, I think there were quite a number of agents vying. Valentine's Day here in Pennsylvania, but of course it was the next morning. What, like an 11-hour time difference or a 13-hour time difference this time of year?
Yeah.
And so we got on the phone, and I remember I wanted to call, but Gail had said that the phone lines could be bad in the rainy season, so we Skyped, and it's been a really unique situation because we completely got to know each other just through Skype, FaceTiming kind of things, and then almost 3 years later, we were finally able to meet in November. But one thing I want to give a shout out to is travel is not necessary. I mean, even a lot of local authors or authors living in the United States, it's, I think, tours and things of that nature, going on book tours is a little bit less common now than it was several years ago. Even for authors that are very far along publishing career, tours don't happen every day, and I think so much is about just engagement with potential book buyers and fans online. And Gail has been amazing with doing Twitter and doing ways to just kind of engage with people. I mean, Gail, you really, through, I think, your social media expertise, you really make it look easy. So the next question is, what are some things that U.S. publishers could do to improve the publishing process for non-U.S. authors? And from my perspective on that one,
as an author, no, I don't know. Go ahead.
Do you want to? Well, I was going to say from an agent perspective, obviously there's sort of the financial logistics that we had to work out in terms of getting everyone paid. I know we've had a lot of questions about just getting copies of the book physically in the Philippines with paperback versus hardcover, things like that. So that's something that I think when you do have an author living abroad, particularly since paperback copies are so much more accessible for teachers and school situations than than a hardcover. That's been something that's been a little bit tricky, sort of getting the date for the paperback from Scholastic, and by not having the paperback out yet in the Philippines, it's been harder. Maybe some opportunities there. So I think having formats available or where the author is living is really crucial. With that said, I think Scholastic did a great job from a publicity standpoint, kind of working with that area when the book came out to really kind of get you at a lot of festivals and events. If you want to kind of take it from there, Gail, that was something that I was impressed with.
Actually,
So the next
their
question,
regional
do you want to
team
continue on that?
is very, 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 very expensive. Yeah, yeah. I think one of the problems, another thing that I kind of had a bit of trouble with is getting because of cost. Remember before I did my book launch, one of the issues that they were afraid of is that the book might not make it on time for my book launch, but thankfully it did. But it's a
So you
problem.
mean the
Like,
books physically wouldn't come from the United States in time? Interesting.
yeah, if it's gonna go in get here in time, because if it's going to be held up in customs, that was one of the major issues that we encountered before my book launch. But thankfully they were able to get it here in time. So my book launch, I had books for my book launch. There. Yeah, that's quite a I don't think there was anything that Scholastic could have done about it, and I'm kind of glad that they managed to get it here in there. So I think one of the issues probably would have to be like making
Good.
adjustments, because shipping books here would take more time than it would like ship within the United States. So yeah, I think that's another consideration that they might wanna
Mm-hmm.
think about. There. So yeah, do you wanna get to the
Just
next
having
question?
enough lead time, making sure books are in the warehouse far enough in advance that they can ship to the Philippines
Yeah,
or wherever
definitely.
the
Yeah.
author is based, and make sure that you take that into account in your warehouse time. Because sometimes I get warehouse
Mhm.
copies from publishers very far in advance. And Gail, you're my only client, I believe, at the moment who's living abroad. So, so
Oh,
it's like
thanks.
ironic when the Ohio book in December and the books don't come out till, for this case, you're kind of down to the wire. So the next question is, what are
Yeah.
some of your reasons for wanting to publish in the United States? Gail,
Oh, I
I'm going
think I
to
must
turn
have
that one over to
questions.
you.
Okay, so one of the first things that one of the main things that I noticed when I first landed on the United States for a visit last November is that you guys have this culture, like expansive reading culture. And unfortunately that's one of the things that we lack here in the Philippines. We we don't really have that easy access. Sometimes it's much better to sometimes it's even easier to get published in the US and have your book circulated here in the Philippines than it is to be published here and circulated, because not all bookstores are going to carry it. Whereas if your book is coming from the US and they have like established channels getting the books, it's much more easier to have the book like circulated within the Philippines via the US, which is kind of like it's sad, and but we have a lot to improve in terms of our reading culture here, and we're trying our best. There are some organizations who do things, but it's still very much raw. If you know, I think that's the perfect description. So yeah, this is one of the main reasons. This is actually the main reason why I opted to get published in the US, because of easier accessibility, the fact that more people will be able to read my book. So yeah, there. Basically,
And
it's
to
more on
that
the
end,
sad.
another thing And another thing that is unique here is being published by Scholastic. You have the ability to be in the Scholastic and Fairs program. So that's
Yeah.
something that, from what I know of other international publishing experiences had, that idea of school book clubs doesn't exist in a lot
Yeah.
of foreign countries in quite the same way. I mean, they definitely exist, but that notion, and I have elementary school age children, so I've volunteered at my fair share of Scholastic book fairs over the years, where the kids come in with their money, and and it's just such a
Yeah.
unique thing because there are certainly authors from other publishers that also published by Scholastic, but the lion's share of them, at least lately, do appear to be a lot of Scholastic titles. So I think that was something that when Scholastic made an offer, I remember you saying, Gail, how compelling that was to sort of see the fair muscle. So that's something that I think in this case is worth highlighting.
Oh,
The
actually,
next
speaking of
question is it oh, do you want to add one more thing?
yeah, sorry. Actually, now that you mentioned the fairs, um, That's another thing that's different here in the Philippines is that book fairs and clubs are only accessible by private schools. So yeah, that's another thing. Since the vast majority are public schools, it's only the private schools that are able to afford access to book fairs because normally when you talk about like public schools here, our education system aren't really that you know as mature as you'd call it because
Mhm.
we lack funds for teachers for books. So having a book have trouble even having complete meals a day. It's harder for them to like have be able to afford books. So the only ones who are able to access book fairs here are middle class and upper middle class kids, which usually are from the yeah. That's another thing to talk about.
That's worth
To add.
noting because my children or older child attends a public school, and my younger daughter in Scholastic is definitely in our public schools.
Yeah.
So moving on, is it necessary to have an agent from the United States in order to be published there?
Oh, I'll give that
We
to
get a
you,
lot of
Alyssa.
questions like, is it okay? I think in the majority of cases, if I just randomly do a search on Publishers Marketplace, you do definitely see quite a few deals. Probably the lion's share of deals are done, in the United States by agents based in the United States. But that said, I think there are a lot of great agents living abroad who are selling in the United States. And I think it's sort of less about where you live and more about who you know. I know I've spoken at other forums over the years, and people talk about the necessity of having a New York agent versus a California agent in Colorado or Texas or North Carolina. And I think kind of the same goes with international publishing. If you know the editors that are buying in the United States, you can really do your job from anywhere. That's one of the things that I love about it. But with that said, there is definitely a home court advantage of being able to go out for coffee or with editors or to meet them at conferences. And if you're coming from an international destination and you don't know those editors in the first place, it can be more challenging. That said, I've worked with people who, have started in New York and then moved to England and vice versa. And I think as long as you have the connections, there are no hard and fast rules. You can definitely be based anywhere if you have the connections. But then, just the logistics of getting money wired to the Philippines, it definitely adds a little bit of time, and you have to learn
Yeah.
the process. But again, one of the things that I sort of love about the push for diverse publishing is that there's just a breadth of diversity. And if that means agents as well as authors living abroad, I say bring it on. Like I enjoy the diversity. Gail, do you have anything that you want to add on that one?
I think you explained it perfectly.
Okay, so we can then
Getting choppy.
if you're writing a book based in the US and you don't live there and can't really afford to travel, how can you make sure it feels authentic to US readers?
Okay, I think that's one question. That's a hard question, but one of the things that I do is that I read a lot, and our culture is if historically story just have like a little history lesson here. The Philippines used to be an American colony, so there are some American cultural stuff that are we're able to adapt to easily. So that's one of the reasons why I'm able to to easily adapt, and the shows that we get here are usually American shows, and instead of from other countries. Yeah, so but if you don't have access to those kinds of things, I think one of the best way to do that is to read a lot. as in like really read a lot. Because if there's one thing that I can say about reading is that reading reading actually gives you a window to a culture that you're reading about. So I consider them like windows, which is one of the reasons why I wrote the book in the first place. Is that my book is that I wanted people to have a window on my culture, and I think it can go the other way around. Like when you read when you read books, which is quite a lot, um, you get a sense of what it's like to live there, and I think that can add a lot of authenticity if you want to write a book set in the US, like by reading a lot and lots of books. So like Alyssa, if you have like something to add to that.
Right. Well, I mean, and this is a little tricky for us to answer because My Fate According to the Butterfly, of course, is set in Manila. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I absolutely fell in love with, never having traveled to the Philippines, is how lush and palpable, and I could taste the street
Oh,
food, and I was at the resort, and like Gail did such a wonderful job of kind of evoking the culture from the beauty to the poverty to the war on drugs. Like it was all there, and it was very palpable for me. And it was a consideration in my mind, are US kids going to be able to relate to this? Because as a kid, you often think about your school and your world and your friends. And while there were a lot of universal things like that in the story, it did cross my mind. But one of the things for me and for some of my colleagues who were early readers of the book was the character of Pepper, who had connections to the United States. And that also kind of
yeah.
made it feel a little bit closer. So, but I think and everything you're saying is true. I mean, there were plenty of books that I read as a kid by US based authors that were set in Switzerland
Yeah.
or what have you, and certainly vice versa. And I think just kind of having the insight, and I think some books are more setting oriented than others. This
Hmm.
very much about, for me, Manila was like almost another character. But if you're writing kind of a story that is sort of less setting rich, then it might not matter, and quite to the same degree that if you're
Yeah,
certain
definitely.
things kind of are just universal. So the next question is, what advice would you give to new writers who want to be published in the United States? Are there ways to increase your chance with US agents or publishers? Well, certainly doing Right on Con is a good place to write. What else would you suggest? I mean,
Well,
I know you participated in a
definitely
lot of
right.
contests
So
and you were very active on social
writing.
media, which again, it doesn't matter if you're, where you are and what the time difference is, as long as
Yeah,
you're, kind of on Twitter, I feel like people will find you eventually. But I'm curious to hear if there are other specific things, Gail, that you did in your agent search and editor search
well,
that were helpful.
I think this might mention happy first book. This isn't like my fate according to the butterfly wasn't the first book that I queried to Alyssa, right? Remember that ugly book? Like,
That is true. There was a
uh,
historical book that you queried earlier.
yeah, and I think one of the things that that really helped me like improve as a writer, and I feel like improving as a writer is what gave me a bigger chance of getting assigned and published in the US, is that I was able to like better myself with each book that I write. And honestly, like I recently finished like a pot full of magic, right? The drafts, and that we were going through the revision, and I could actually feel how different it was when I was writing My Faith According to the Butterfly and the first unpublished the trunk book, like the shelf book, the first one, the ugly one. Uh, I could like feel the difference, like how easier it was for it's as much easier it is for me now to uh to write a book than it is like the first time that I wrote one. So honestly, isn't like a secret recipe for you to get published easier, but just to keep on writing and keep on improving. There.
Keep on writing, keep on improving, and there's so much information online.
Yeah.
so you can educate yourself, and, querying the people who have books that are not necessarily identical to yours, but feel kind of akin to yours. Or like, oh, well, if she liked this, she might like that. And, reading and writing are so essential, and just kind of being immersed in worlds. But I do think with all of the interviews online and all of the deal logs online, there are definitely a lot of ways to keep informed. And, there was a time where I do think before social media and technology was at the point that it is, where it would have been harder for an international author, because if you're not traveling to the United States, you're not doing school visits in the United States and spend, an international plane ticket to attend NCTE or ALA versus a domestic ticket, it is a much bigger financial risk for a publisher. But I think, with just the focus on diverse publishing and underrepresented voices, people are certainly looking for those authors within the United States. But I think one of the beautiful things is they're also looking outside. And because technology and social media is as advanced as it is, and you can engage from your living room, on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning, depending on what time of day you're in, I think it's not as big a deal as it was, even when we were selling this book, which was my fate was 2 years ago. And I think it's gotten even easier since, with all of the, kind of technological advances and the popularity of social media and publishing. So I think it's actually a really good time to be an international author, because anything can be spun as diverse and fresh and new, and kind of everyone is represented voices, and that is global, and that is within the United States, and that is certainly without it too. So so the next question is about my region. Should I explain words that Americans may not know?
Well, not necessarily, because readers are smarter than, they'll be able to get the context. You don't necessarily have to like outright sometimes, but not always. I remember like in my Faith According to the Butterfly, there was like this there was this instance like I was asked to like explain, but like somehow like put within the narrative what a waiting shed is, like here in the Philippines, because here in the Philippines we don't really have like bus stops, because our bus stops our buses are just like at bus stations. They don't necessarily like stop at stops, it's more like it's the it's the other mode of public transportation that stops in certain areas. And we have like what we call like waiting sheds, where people would wait for a specific like a jeepney or a tricycle. So in terms of that, I didn't necessarily have to like say that the waiting shed is like this and like that, and like how you have to wait on this is where the people wait. But I explained it in such a way that you will understand what a waiting shed is, without really saying it like kind of like a dictionary explanation or something. You just basically something like a describe what it does, and then call it by its name. So you don't necessarily have to like say it by define it per se, because it's going to be boring if you keep on defining.
And I think kids and
Hello?
adults, for that matter, to learn about new stuff. Like I read a book for my women's fiction book club called The Lager Queens of Minnesota this summer, and it was all about beer making. And I am not very knowledgeable about beer, and certainly not about beer making. And I learned so much, and there was so much terminology. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't spoon fed. It was just kind of explained as kind of a beauty sometimes. Itself, like a foreign country, like, I always think about like Lost in Translation, and like how, that was, and just kind of how immersed you feel. And I think, the best thing about, kind of whether it's, beer making in Minnesota, which I knew nothing about, or, kind of foreign exposure, as was the case in My Fate or A Lost in Translation. One of the beauties is not to qualify anything too much and let readers kind of infer and learn. The next question is, do you feel the need to write stories that are best since that's where your books are going to be published? And Gail, so far you have me a story set in the US, so I'm guessing you don't feel that you need to, to do that. But if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, I don't. Well, letting me write whatever I want, as long as like I'm within my limits. But so far, every idea I think that I've pitched you are based in the Philippines.
Yeah,
right?
and you draw a lot
Yeah,
from
I think
Filipino
everything.
mythology, which I find really interesting.
Yeah,
And again, just something that does not cross my submission inbox every day. Do you ever think about writing a story set in the United States? We've never.
Probably.
I don't know if that's something that interests you, and I certainly don't feel your editor not calling you up and saying, "When is Gail going to write a story set in New York?" Because again, for a while, it felt like every book when I first started publishing, which was about 20 years ago, it felt like a really disproportionately high number of books were not only set in the United States, but set in New York City, because that was where publishing was centered. And I've always, even though I'm from the East Coast, I've always been interested in the South and the Midwest. And one of my clients just published this wonderful book called Itch, which is set in Ohio, and it's Ohio State football.
Is that the one with Holy?
Might as well be Manila, because it's, again, very foreign to me, and it's not something I grew up with. It's something I've read about and know about. So it's I think, people right now seem to be in a place where they, we've seen, there's certainly wonderful books that are set in New York City all the time, and I definitely represent a number of them, and they're a great part of the canon. But again, we are in a place where I think everyone is looking to do things that are, kind of have seen them. I think the fact that you bring kind of Filipino culture to American kids through your work is just such an asset. So it's, if you ever want to set a story in the US, I think you certainly have the ability and the knowledge, but I've loved everything that's been set where it's been set. So.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Actually, you don't necessarily have to as long as the book is accessible. I think that's one of the rules that I have for myself, at least, is that as long as it's accessible and universal in a sense, I'd say go for it. And I ask Alyssa what she thinks, and she's usually fine with it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think there's really no need to force yourself to base it on the US if you're not used to it.
Well said. So, moving on to the next question. How do you connect with the writing community? Are there local options, or is it mainly an internet-based connection?
Oh, the funny thing is that every writing friend that I meet, that they actually met, I met them through Twitter first. Like Rin Chupeco, she has like a book published in with Source Books and HarperCollins. And the funny thing is that we both live she lives in within Metro Manila, and I live near Metro Manila. And the funny thing is that we met through Twitter, of all places. And then now that now we hang out with my fellow Filipino friends who are also from Metro Manila, and we just got to meet each other online, through Facebook and Twitter, sometimes even Instagram. I met some people from Instagram, so they're like social networking. It's you get some people indicate their location there, and then if I see this person is lives within the vicinity, I ask them you guys want to meet up or something like that. And usually if they're available, we usually meet up for coffee. And the funny, it doesn't necessarily have to you don't need to look very far. And there are people writers are there are a lot of writers in the Philippines, and you can get started if you're shy. You can just get started with like Twitter first, then grow it from there, and that's just what I did. And then I have like I met some of my bestest buddies through Twitter, and and I'm actually quite glad for
Yeah.
it.
But you love Twitter.
Yeah, go ahead,
Like
go ahead.
actually on Twitter is you. There's a writer who's less Twitter centered. Like, did you ever meet any writers? I know you have events and festivals. Have you ever met anyone that
Yeah,
way, or and again, and I know that social media is totally amazing at it,
well,
but is it like, did anyone meet, or has it all been
well, I
more through Twitter?
did. Mm, Definitely, I did. There are some
Does it
local
all go back to Twitter?
conferences that yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be through Twitter. And like there are local conferences. Sometimes, sometimes they actually announce it when I'm part of something, or I retweet conferences that that some that I might be a bit busy to attend. There are a lot of National Book Development Board. That's like they hold a lot of
Mm,
conferences and events and festivals, and there's like a Manila International book fair. There are a lot even book clubs.
mm,
They're like a flips. I think it's called
cool.
flipping pages. Yeah, that's the name. I from on they're like a book club basically, and like I met some of them, and they're pretty cool. And it's quite interesting. There are like communities here, and sometimes it's really hard, especially if you're an introvert, to like try to get to know fellow writers through conferences. But that's one of the main things that you can actually meet fellow like-minded individuals by attending conferences. If not, you can just
Right.
use the internet then. Yeah, there. So
Right.
wait.
I definitely met probably more of my clients conference than I have through social media. I mean, I definitely have a mixture
Yeah.
of the two, and social media is also just, queer internet querying kind of falls into that. But yeah, it's nice to diversify. It's nice to have options, and conferences are great because I feel like you learn a lot. I
Actually,
often
Alyssa,
learn a lot as a presenter. It's about craft.
yeah, well, we're both extroverts, so I guess like, so I guess that's why conferences
I'm
work
not
for
an
us.
extrovert. I think I'm a gregarious introvert, actually, because I really enjoy alone time, like a lot. Maybe it's just because I have young kids, and I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, you go to
probably.
school, let's get to work and do the laundry. But cool. Well, it's good to have options. So
Yeah,
moving
well,
on to
I'm
the
very
next
much
question.
an extrovert, so yeah.
You are very much an extrovert. Do you recommend getting critique partners that are in the US? Any suggestions on how to do it?
Oh, doesn't like Right on Con have like a critique partner program? I believe I saw something like, I think I'm not, I can't sure know for sure. It's like CP, critique partner program where you get to meet people through the Right on Con forums, and then like
Mhm.
I don't know how. I don't know exactly how it works. Sorry, I just I had like a lot of things to do, like working on the third book for Alyssa. So I've
Mhm.
been writing, so
Jill,
I haven't.
for my did you use critique partners who were US based? Like were you I know yours,
Yeah,
are they
I
based in
did.
the US? Uh-huh.
I did actually. I met them again since I didn't really have access to US conferences at that time. Is that I did have like critique partners that I met through Twitter and Facebook, and actually, even my one of my mentors. Oh, that's another thing that I like. That's where I another like that's one of the things that I took part of is at Pitch Wars. Pitch Wars. I met a lot of I think I participated in Pitch Madness, and that's one of the first time that I actually got involved in the online writing community in the US. That's where I started knowing people, and then I took part in the writing in the margins program by Justina Ireland. I met Kate Messner, one of my mentors, and then through Twitter I met Annika Morose Risi, and then I believe I met Erin on Facebook, Erin Kelly, and she also became my mentor. And yeah, different. Most of them are internet based though, so
but they live for the most part in the United States. I think I don't know about everyone on that list, but
yeah, they live in the
and that was helpful.
Yeah, and it helps a lot.
Again, I kind of stand by it. Doesn't matter where you live, but it does probably help when the boutique partners have some knowledge of what the U.S. editors are very keen on business. I'm always reminded of that. The people the editors that I have lunch with and the editors that I speak to. I mean, granted, I tend to work with a lot of people who I started with at Simon & Schuster 20 years ago. And now they're all dispersed at different companies. But because we had that really initial bonding experience, we still keep in kind of close touch, and they've become, buyers and people that I do business with. And, there's certainly others too. But I think it's sort of less about where you live and more about like kind of having the knowledge of, which house is looking for books and which else is looking for, more illustrated projects or, whatever the thing is that people are very hungry for. It is helpful to kind of be tapped into that. And because the editors are in the US, a lot of that does feel US centric. But again, I think if you're, very tapped into that, there are so many ways to stay connected that are not about being physically present, that you can have that knowledge and be based, elsewhere. So
I mean, like everyone who became my mentor. Yeah. So yeah, definitely, I totally agree with that. And the funny thing is
so
that
next
I
question.
met them. Yeah, sure. What's up? Next question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gail. Did you have another point on that? I didn't mean to rush you along.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I'm good. I totally agree
so
with
the next question is story structure different in the US versus other countries?
Honestly, I have no idea.
That's a very interesting question.
Yeah. I really don't have an idea. Because so far the books that I read, even the ones that are published here, have the same story structure. And especially if you're talking,
there isn't necessarily definitive type of story structure. Years ago, I attended the Bologna Book Fair, and I remember looking at some of the picture book artwork by some international artists, and it was beautiful, but it felt very different than what was popular in the United States. And this is quite a few years ago. So like back when like Fancy Nancy and Ladybug Girl were very popular, and the stuff that I was seeing out of Italy and other countries was so different. And in that moment, I was like, wow, there really just are different visual sensibilities that it doesn't feel commercial enough to be in, Target in the United States, but it's beautiful and could certainly work in other, forums and venues. But as far as the story structure on a more kind of novel level, I kind of feel, it's obviously a very subjective business, and things that engage one person might not engage another. But I haven't found too much difference. And again, the majority of my clients are based in the United States, so I'm not necessarily the best person to answer. But, when Butterfly crossed my desk, I can say that I just thought it was something special because it was showing me something that I don't see a lot of on a day-to-day basis. It was such a new world, but it was also a riveting story, and I didn't feel, that it was particularly, long-winded or anything that made it ill-suited, to the market. I mean, times I do feel like, and this is probably less true now, but years ago, a lot of the books that I edited when I was an editor at Simon and Schuster, like they did well in the US, but sometimes they would do really well in England, because I think I do have a little bit more of that sort of British upmarket sensibility, and I wasn't as into some of the trends, like the Gossip Girl trend. I didn't really have a book like that on my list. So I think sometimes from a sensibility standpoint, I definitely personally tend to like a lot of things that tend to do well in the UK. But I think the US market has changed a lot since then too. And now, I kind of just stick by a good story is a good story, and it's all very subjective. So with the art, I saw a very clear difference kind of internationally, but with story structure, I personally haven't experienced that too much.
Honestly, like speaking of which, like now that you mentioned the art, picture books here are, I've seen picture books. When I bought some for my niece, they were labeled 8 to 12 picture books, sometimes even
Interesting.
gorgeous.
8 to 12 for picture book.
8 to 12, yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with the reading culture here, probably, because like I said, not many kids are we don't really have like that much of a reading culture, especially within the pub system. So probably that's why it's like even they have like more illustrations, they have to be more visuals, something like that. Very interesting. I'm gonna show it to you one time, like if we ever see each other again, like I'm gonna give you an 8 to 12 picture book. Yeah,
Well, my oldest is going to be 10 soon, so he's right in the middle of that. Cool. Do you have any other points on that question, Gail, or should we move on to the next question?
I'm good. Yeah. Listen,
all right. So the next question.
I'm good.
Are U.S. readers interested in reading contemporary YA books that are based outside of the U.S.? I feel like a lot of the contemporary YA I read is based in the US, but I don't live there. That's another very interesting question.
I'll give that to you, Alyssa.
I preface all of this by saying that I think everyone has been looking for underrepresented cultures, so that I think means that it can be underrepresented voices and cultures in the United States, and it can be underrepresented stuff outside the United States. With that said, a lot of the YA books that I have read recently have been set in the US. But like, for example, I just finished listening on my wonderful Libby app where I get free audiobooks through my local library. I recently listened to Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, which I really enjoyed. And there is a period where the girl who is based in Chicago, but her family emigrated from Mexico. She goes to Mexico in the book. And it was one of my favorite sections of the book. I mean, I'm not, I'm 43 years old, so I'm not necessarily your typical YA target reader, but I thought that was beautifully done. And, I very much related to her, and, her depictions of Chicago were wonderful too. I enjoyed that. And then my own client, Julie Berry, wrote Lovely War. That was an indie bestseller and lots of accolades and awards. And that was set, of course, that's a period historical fiction book. And a lot of it was set in England and throughout, the front in Europe during World War I. So that's definitely international. And I haven't read Ruta Pettis's new book yet, but my assistant and I were just talking about it yesterday. And I believe that has some international elements. So I think there's definitely a lot of precedent for successful books that are set abroad, and certainly books that are, fantastical and feel like other cultures. I mean, I don't know that much fantasy myself, but I know there's popular YA books that are kind of derived from, various types of lores. So I think, kids are very interested in the characters and connecting with the setting. And if you were to go to the New York Times bestseller list, probably most majority of the books might not be internationally set, but it's not to say that there aren't plenty of successful books that are internationally set or partially internationally set. And I think there's definitely precedent for books that have been successful where the characters are living abroad, or sometimes the expat book is very popular too, where the person might be from America but they spend time abroad. So that's a construct that I think has worked well as well. So curious to hear your insights on that, Gail, if you have anything to add.
Well, honestly, I'm much more an MG reader, so I,
Mhm.
I don't really read much. Like of my life
And I
to
think
read
all
about
of this
MG
applies to
readers.
middle grade
So
too, even though the question was YA centered.
yeah,
There are definitely
they're really
great middle grade books that are set abroad, for
is
sure. One of my
the
favorites was
but
The
for me,
War That Saved My Life.
I really
Yeah.
have
Okay, so the next question. Can my query list local publications that a U.S. agent / editor has never heard of?
well, definitely. Well, if you're gonna talk about like MG books, like I think I sorry. What? Sorry. Oh, query local. Alyssa, what's the legal? I don't legally. Is that considered? I don't know. In considered like local publicist. Honestly, I don't know. When I'm faced with
I
a
mean,
question like that, I just
I think
Alyssa, what I'm gonna say. I usually just refer to, so probably
I think a
might be
publication
better
is a
to answer this
publication. So
very
I'm
local
happy to read about a
publications
place
then.
where someone has been published before, and whether that's something
Hmm.
like Highlights Magazine or the Magazine of Vermont
Probably might
College
want
MFA,
to choose
which
if
I
you're
know
gonna
of,
get an
or
agent
whether
or
it's
get
something
published.
abroad, it doesn't much matter to me. Yeah, I think as long as, I think all prior publications are something to be celebrated and mentioned. And, it's always great when it's something, if somebody sent me a query and said that they were previously published in the New Yorker, I would be like, wow, that's smaller publications that it's still very impressive, but it doesn't necessarily carry quite, but it's certainly never about any prior terms, I think.
Mhm.
The next question is very interesting. Are there topics that are taboo in the US that are not taboo in other places? And I think, again, we're in a very sensitive publishing
I think
climate.
that
Everybody, I think, agrees that we
we're
need.
going to uh, what eh. Yeah. Alyssa, you still there? Hello?
Yeah, you phased out for us. I didn't hear what you said. Our last question is going to be,
Hello?
are there topics in the US that aren't taboo? Uh, Gail, can you hear?
Anyway,
Hello?
in yeah, there. Hmm. Well, depend on the. Is that right to think? Because
Sorry,
there are
Gail, I
books that I
didn't hear
read that have a
you said.
little
I think there
much
was
more
a
violence in them.
technological blip.
What? Sorry, you're breaking up, Alyssa.
Sorry, I can't hear you either, so I don't know what's been said. I will, and I know this is our last question because we're almost out of time. I didn't hear anything you said, Gail. I apologize. Do you want to try to kind of what you just said? Gail?
Hello?
Hmm. Okay.
Hello?
I'll just finish this quickly. We've had some blips, so I didn't hear everything that Gail
Yeah.
said, but I think the bottom line is we're living
Go
in a
ahead.
climate and a culture.
I don't really have like a particular answer to that one because
I think we're in a climate of sensitivity, so there are definitely issues that might be taboo in some cultures that are not taboo in others. So I think this is a case where the publisher would bring on sensitivity readers, would really kind of look to the critical community and best to handle things, because I don't want to name any names, but there have really been examples of things that haven't intended to be taboo but have been. So I think we're just in a climate of real sensitivity, and I just need to be aware of that and kind of get those sensitivity readers, vet each other, just make sure that we're kind of representing things as kind of accurately and as sensitively as we can.
yeah, I agree with Alyssa. Yeah. So like probably like if you read idea if subject is hello. Anyway, I'm getting
We're
choppy,
ending.
but
Okay, thank you
out of
and good
time.
night.
Hello? Here.
Good
Yeah, we're
night. Thank